Some people walk into your life quietly and destroy the future you thought was already written. The ballroom inside the Ritz-Carlton Manhattan glowed like a diamond beneath the midnight skyline. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of America's wealthiest names while waiters in white gloves carried champagne across the marble floor with perfect silence. At the center of it all stood Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO every financial magazine loved to photograph beside words like untouchable, brilliant, and unstoppable. His black tuxedo looked tailored like armor against the world, his silver watch reflected the warm gold light above him, and the massive engagement ring hidden inside his pocket carried the weight of an empire waiting for him to finally settle down. Across the ballroom, Victoria Sinclair laughed gracefully beside New York's elite, already looking like the future Mrs. Caldwell. She was elegant, polished, born into old money and old expectations. The kind of woman people described as perfect before they even knew her name. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Ethan would walk onto the stage, thank the investors who helped expand Caldwell Technologies into a billion-dollar powerhouse, then ask Victoria to marry him in front of Manhattan's most powerful families. Every detail had been planned weeks in advance. Even the violin quartet near the stage had rehearsed the exact moment they would begin playing after she said yes. But destiny rarely asks permission before changing a man's life. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo and moved toward the stage when something unexpected drifted through the ballroom. Piano music. Soft. Slow. Beautiful enough to silence conversation one table at a time. He stopped walking. The melody carried something strangely human inside a room filled with people pretending to be. Ethan turned toward the far side of the ballroom where an old grand piano sat beneath a golden spotlight near the windows overlooking Central Park. And then he saw her. Naomi Brooks sat alone at the piano in a simple black dress that looked almost invisible compared to the diamonds surrounding her. Her dark skin glowed beneath the amber light while her fingers moved across the keys with calm confidence, like she belonged more to the music than to the room itself. She wasn't performing for attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. In a ballroom full of people desperate to be seen, she seemed completely untouched by the need to matter to them. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan forgot about the speech in his hand. The noise around him faded until all he could hear was the piano and the quiet rhythm of his own breathing. Naomi lifted her eyes for only a second. Their gazes met across the crowded ballroom. No smile. No flirtation. Just one still moment that felt strangely dangerous. Ethan had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals without hesitation, yet something about that single glance unsettled him more than any boardroom battle ever had. Mr. Caldwell, his assistant whispered beside him nervously. Everyone's waiting. Ethan didn't answer right away. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the future his family had designed for him. He was staring at a woman who looked like she had walked straight out of a life he had forgotten was possible. And somewhere deep beneath the weight of money, expectations, and power, something inside him quietly began to wake up. The applause inside the ballroom sounded distant to Ethan Caldwell for the rest of the night. Even after he slipped the engagement ring onto Victoria Sinclair's finger beneath flashing cameras and standing ovations, his mind kept drifting back toward the woman at the piano. He barely remembered the speech he gave. Barely remembered the congratulations from investors and politicians. The only thing that remained painfully clear was the strange calm in Naomi Brooks's eyes before she disappeared from the ballroom without saying goodbye to anyone. Around midnight, Manhattan shimmered beneath a cold February rain while black luxury cars lined the street outside the Ritz-Carlton. Victoria leaned against Ethan's arm as photographers called their names from behind velvet ropes. She looked radiant in her silver gown, smiling like the future had already been perfectly arranged. You were quiet tonight, she whispered once they reached the car. Ethan loosened his tie slightly. Long day. Victoria studied him for a second longer than usual. You forgot part of your speech. Ethan forced a small smile. I do not think anyone noticed. But someone had noticed. Victoria always noticed when control slipped from his hands. Back inside the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the city lights stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows while Ethan poured himself a glass of bourbon he barely touched. The engagement ring box still sat on the marble counter beside him, now empty, like proof that the night had gone exactly according to plan. So why did it feel wrong? He walked toward the silent piano near the corner of the room. His mother had once played it every Sunday morning before she passed away when he was 17. After her death, the instrument became decoration instead of music. Ethan rested his fingers against the keys but stopped himself. The melody Naomi played earlier still echoed in his head with uncomfortable clarity. Soft. Honest. Alive. His phone vibrated against the counter. A message from his assistant appeared on the screen. The pianist from tonight was hired through the hotel entertainment agency. Name, Naomi Brooks. Ethan stared at the message longer than he should have. Then, before he could explain the impulse even to himself, he typed back one sentence. Find out where she performs regularly. The next afternoon, instead of attending a private lunch with investors in Midtown, Ethan found himself standing on a quiet street in Brooklyn beneath a flickering neon sign that read Blue Harbor Jazz Cafe. It was nothing like the places he usually visited. No photographers. No executives. No marble floors. Just warm yellow lights glowing through old windows while soft jazz drifted into the street. Ethan stepped inside slowly. The cafe smelled like coffee, cinnamon, and rain-soaked coats. A few college students sat near the back typing on laptops while an elderly couple shared pie beside the window. Nobody recognized him. For the first time in years, he entered a room without people changing their behavior. The moment he walked in. And there she was. Naomi stood near the counter laughing quietly with two little girls who could not have been older than 8. One of them held a violin case almost bigger than she was. Miss Naomi, the younger girl asked excitedly, are you really coming Saturday? Naomi smiled warmly. I would not miss it for the world. Ethan noticed the way the children looked at her. Not like she was important. Like she was safe. Naomi finally turned and saw him standing near the entrance in his dark wool coat that probably cost more than the cafe's monthly rent. For a brief second, surprise crossed her face. Then it disappeared completely. No excitement. No nervousness. No attempt to impress him. She simply wiped her hands gently on a towel and walked over. You are far from Midtown, Mr. Caldwell, she said calmly. Ethan almost laughed at the honesty in her voice. You remember me. Naomi tilted her head slightly. You are hard to forget. Billionaires usually are. Ethan glanced around the modest cafe again before looking back at her. I wanted to hear you play again. Naomi studied him carefully, almost like she could see past the expensive watch, the tailored coat, and the carefully controlled image the world worshipped. Then she said the one thing nobody in his world ever dared to say to him. That sounds lonely. After that night in Brooklyn, something shifted inside Ethan Caldwell in a way he could neither control nor explain. For the first time in years, his mornings no longer began with stock reports or conference calls from London. Instead, he found himself thinking about a woman who lived in a small apartment above a jazz cafe and somehow carried more peace in her silence than most people carried in entire lifetimes. 3 days later, Ethan canceled a private dinner with 2 venture capital firms and drove back to Brooklyn himself. His driver looked confused when Ethan asked to be dropped off 2 blocks away from Blue Harbor Jazz Cafe. Billionaires did not usually walk through cold streets alone carrying coffee in paper cups. But Ethan was beginning to realize he no longer wanted every moment of his life protected behind glass. The neighborhood felt alive in ways Manhattan never did. Street vendors sold pretzels beside steaming food carts while old jazz music drifted from open windows above corner stores. Children laughed somewhere in the distance despite the February wind cutting through the streets. Ethan stood outside the cafe for a moment before noticing Naomi across the street helping several children carry musical instruments into a small brick building with faded blue doors. Above the entrance hung a modest sign that read Harmony House Youth Center. The paint was peeling slightly around the edges. The building looked old. Tired. Forgotten by the city. Yet the children entering it looked happier than most adults Ethan knew. Naomi noticed him standing near the crosswalk and folded her arms calmly. "You followed me again." Ethan crossed the street slowly. "I brought coffee this time." One corner of Naomi's mouth lifted slightly. "That makes it less alarming." She accepted the coffee but did not invite him inside immediately. Ethan glanced toward the building. "What is this place?" Naomi looked through the glass doors where a little boy struggled to carry a cello nearly as tall as he was. Without hesitation, she walked over and helped him adjust the case strap before returning to Ethan. "It is where kids come after school when the world forgets they exist." Ethan looked at her quietly. Naomi continued. "Music classes. Tutoring. Hot meals on weekends when some families cannot afford groceries." Ethan frowned slightly. "You run all this?" Naomi shrugged like it was nothing special. "With donations and volunteers. Some months are easier than others." Ethan had spent the last decade inside buildings worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet standing outside that worn youth center unsettled him more than any business meeting ever had. Because for the first time, he was looking at people who needed things money alone could not instantly fix. A little girl suddenly pushed open the door and ran toward Naomi excitedly. "Miss Naomi, the piano key still sticks." Naomi smiled gently. "I will fix it before rehearsal." The child finally noticed Ethan standing nearby in his expensive charcoal coat. "Are you famous?" she asked innocently. Ethan blinked in surprise. Naomi hid a small laugh behind her coffee cup. "No," she answered for him. "He is just lost." The girl nodded seriously like that explanation made perfect sense before running back inside. Ethan found himself smiling despite himself. It felt unfamiliar on his face. Naomi watched him carefully. "You really do not belong here, Ethan." He looked toward the children through the window again. One boy practiced trumpet badly while another tapped piano keys with clumsy determination. The sound was imperfect. Loud. Human. Ethan spoke softly. "Maybe I am tired of belonging where I came from." Naomi's expression changed slightly after that. Not softer exactly, but less guarded. Snow began drifting lightly through the Brooklyn air while traffic moved slowly beyond the streetlights. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Naomi opened the door to the youth center and stepped aside quietly. "You can come in for 5 minutes," she said. "But if one of the kids challenges you to chess, do not embarrass yourself. They play to win." And for reasons Ethan could not fully understand yet, walking into that small building beside her felt more important than every room full of billionaires he had entered before. Victoria Sinclair had spent most of her life understanding one simple truth about powerful men. They only drifted emotionally when something stronger than ambition captures their attention. And during the 2 weeks after the engagement party, Ethan Caldwell became a man she barely recognized. It started with small things. He stopped answering late-night investor calls unless they were urgent. He canceled 2 private golf meetings with senators he had spent months trying to impress. One evening she arrived at his penthouse unannounced and found him sitting alone beside the piano with a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand while soft jazz played quietly through the speakers. Ethan never listened to jazz. "You missed dinner with my parents again," Victoria said carefully as she placed her designer handbag on the marble counter. Ethan looked up slowly, almost as if he had forgotten she was coming. "I lost track of time." Victoria studied him in silence. The city lights reflected across the windows behind him while the engagement ring sparkled on her finger beneath the kitchen lights like a reminder neither of them wanted to discuss tonight. Your assistant says you have been spending time in Brooklyn. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Since when do you question my schedule? Since you stopped acting like yourself. Her voice remained calm, elegant, controlled. Victoria Sinclair never raised her voice. Women from families like hers were trained to destroy quietly. Ethan stood and adjusted the sleeve of his dark sweater. It is business. Victoria walked closer. Does this business have a name? Ethan did not answer immediately, and in that silence, Victoria found all the confirmation she needed. The next afternoon, Victoria sat inside a private lounge overlooking Fifth Avenue while a woman from a high-end investigative agency slid a thin folder across the table. Naomi Brooks, the investigator said professionally. 32 years old. Lives in Brooklyn. Music teacher. Runs a non-profit youth program called Harmony House. Victoria flipped through the pages slowly. Photographs of Naomi helping children carry instruments. Naomi walking through Brooklyn in winter coats that looked years old. Naomi laughing beside a group of students outside a small grocery store. Victoria's expression darkened almost invisibly. Any scandals? She asked. No criminal record. No lawsuits. No social climbing history. Honestly, the investigator hesitated slightly. She seems unusually clean. Victoria closed the folder carefully. That answer bothered her more than dirt would have. Because women like Naomi were dangerous in ways tabloids could not expose. She represented authenticity. And authenticity had a way of making carefully manufactured lives feel hollow. 3 nights later, Ethan arrived at Harmony House carrying several large cardboard boxes filled with brand new music stands and repaired instruments he had quietly purchased after noticing how damaged the old ones were. The children rushed toward him excitedly the moment he entered. Mr. Ethan brought the good snacks again. One little boy shouted while holding up expensive cookies like treasure. Ethan laughed under his breath, a sound Naomi still seemed surprised to hear from him. You are spoiling them, Naomi said while organizing sheet music near the piano. That accusation would hurt more if you looked upset about it. Naomi shook her head softly, but Ethan noticed the faint smile she tried to hide. For a moment, everything inside the old youth center felt warm. Honest. Simple. Then the front door opened. Silence spread slowly across the room when Victoria Sinclair stepped inside wearing a cream-colored designer coat that probably cost more than Harmony House's yearly heating bill. Her diamond earrings shimmered beneath the fluorescent lights while her eyes calmly scanned the aging walls, the peeling paint, and the children sitting quietly with instruments in their laps. Ethan immediately straightened. Victoria. Naomi looked between them once before understanding exactly who stood in front of her. Victoria smiled politely and extended her hand with perfect social grace. You must be Naomi. I have heard so much about you. Naomi shook her hand gently. That usually means trouble. For the first time in years, Victoria's smile nearly cracked. The tension inside Harmony House lingered long after Victoria Sinclair left the building that afternoon. Even the children sensed something uncomfortable hidden beneath her polished smile and perfectly measured words. Ethan watched through the window as Victoria stepped into the back seat of a black town car waiting beside the curb. Snow drifted lightly around the street while her driver closed the door with quiet precision. The moment the car disappeared, Ethan turned toward Naomi. I am sorry about that. Naomi continued stacking sheet music without looking at him. For what exactly? Ethan hesitated. Victoria can be intense. Naomi gave a soft laugh under her breath. That is an elegant billionaire way of describing territorial. Ethan leaned against the old piano carefully. She was trying to understand why I keep coming here. Naomi finally looked at him directly. And have you figured that out yet? Ethan opened his mouth but stopped himself. The truth felt too dangerous to say out loud because he was beginning to realize the answer had nothing to do with music anymore. Before he could respond, one of the volunteers approached Naomi carrying a stack of envelopes. "These came from the city office," the woman said nervously. Naomi's expression shifted immediately as she scanned the paperwork. Ethan noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders. "What happened?" Naomi folded the papers calmly even though disappointment flashed briefly across her face. "Funding cuts." Ethan frowned. "How bad?" Naomi forced a small smile that did not fully reach her eyes. "Bad enough that I may have to cancel the spring music program." Ethan looked around the youth center again. The cracked paint. The worn chairs. The piano with chipped keys repaired too many times to count. Then he looked at the children laughing near the back room while practicing trumpet notes completely out of tune. "How much do you need?" Naomi immediately shook her head. "No," Ethan blinked. "You do not even know the number. I know what comes after taking money from powerful people." Her voice remained calm but firm. "People begin expecting ownership." Ethan stared at her quietly. Nobody had ever refused his help without trying to negotiate something in return. Naomi walked toward the windows overlooking the snowy Brooklyn street. "This place survives because people care about these kids. Not because billionaires decide to feel charitable for a month." Ethan followed her slowly. "You think that is why I am here?" Naomi crossed her arms gently. "I think men like you are used to fixing problems with checks because it keeps things emotionally convenient." The honesty in her words landed harder than criticism ever had. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before speaking. "Maybe you are right." Naomi looked surprised by the answer. "But I still want to help," he continued quietly. "Not because I pity this place. Because it matters." For several seconds, Naomi simply studied him while snow gathered along the corners of the old window outside. Then one of the children suddenly ran into the room holding a flyer excitedly. "Miss Naomi, are we really playing at the Caldwell Foundation Gala next month?" Ethan turned immediately. "What gala?" Naomi sighed softly. "A charity event. One performance. The donation would cover almost half our yearly expenses." Ethan's expression darkened slightly. "My family hosts that gala every year." Naomi nodded. "I know." Ethan instantly understood the problem. The Caldwell Foundation Gala was not simply a fundraiser. It was one of the most exclusive social events in Manhattan. Politicians, celebrities, hedge fund executives, old money families. The kind of room where people measured human worth by last names and investment portfolios. Naomi noticed the concern in his eyes. "Relax," she said softly. "I have survived uncomfortable rooms before." Ethan looked at her carefully beneath the dim afternoon light. "You should not have to." Naomi smiled sadly this time. "That is easy to say when the world was built for your comfort." Her words stayed with Ethan long after he left Brooklyn that evening. And later that night, while Manhattan glittered outside his penthouse windows, Victoria Sinclair sat across from him at dinner wearing a silk ivory dress and studying him over candlelight with terrifying calm. "You are bringing her to the gala, are you not?" Ethan slowly set down his wine glass. "Harmony House was invited months ago." Victoria nodded once. "Then let me warn you now." Her voice remained elegant enough to almost sound gentle. "Women like Naomi Brooks do not survive rooms built by families like ours." Ethan looked at his fiancée in silence for several long seconds before quietly replying, "Maybe that says more about the room than it does about her." The Caldwell Foundation Winter Gala was the kind of night New York magazines spent weeks talking about before it even happened. Black luxury cars lined the entrance of the Metropolitan Grand Hotel while cameras flashed endlessly beneath towering gold lights. Women stepped onto the red carpet wearing gowns worth more than most Americans earned in a year, and men shook hands while discussing mergers, politics, and private investments with rehearsed confidence. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors so brightly it almost hurt to look directly upward. Everything about the night was designed to display power. And Victoria Sinclair ruled rooms like this effortlessly. She moved through the crowd in a silver couture gown with perfect posture and a smile refined through generations of old money expectations. Beside her stood Ethan Caldwell, dressed in a midnight black tuxedo while reporters called their names from across the ballroom. But unlike Victoria, Ethan looked distracted. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the entrance. Waiting. Victoria noticed every single time. Then the ballroom slowly quieted. Naomi Brooks entered beside 6 children from Harmony House carrying instrument cases carefully in their small hands. Naomi wore a simple dark emerald gown that flowed softly around her without diamonds or designer logos demanding attention. Her hair rested naturally over one shoulder while she guided the children gently through a room built to intimidate people exactly like them. Conversations lowered into whispers almost immediately. Ethan saw it happen in real time. The subtle glances. The judgment hidden behind champagne smiles. One older woman near the ballroom staircase leaned toward her husband and whispered something that made him laugh quietly while looking directly at Naomi. Another guest openly asked, "Who invited the music teacher?" Naomi heard everything. Ethan could tell by the brief stillness in her shoulders. But she continued walking calmly beside the children as if dignity itself protected her from humiliation. Victoria stepped forward elegantly. "Naomi," she greeted warmly enough to sound sincere in front of the guests nearby. "You made it." Naomi smiled politely. The children were excited. Victoria glanced toward the young musicians before lowering her voice slightly. "I hope they understand how important tonight is. Rooms like this can change lives." Naomi met her gaze without fear. "Rooms like this can also reveal people." Ethan almost smiled despite the tension growing around them. Throughout the evening, the discomfort inside the ballroom spread quietly like smoke. Wealthy donors asked Naomi uncomfortable questions disguised as politeness. "So where exactly did you study music? How inspiring that you dedicate your life to charity work. Brooklyn must be very different from Manhattan." Every sentence carried invisible judgment beneath expensive manners. Ethan watched Naomi endure it all with astonishing grace. She never raised her voice. Never lost control. She simply answered calmly while keeping the children focused on their upcoming performance. And somehow that quiet strength unsettled the room more than anger ever could. Later that night, Ethan stood near the bar speaking with several board members when he overheard laughter from a nearby table. "It is obvious what she is doing," one man muttered while sipping whiskey. "Women do not get close to billionaires accidentally." Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Before he could respond, another voice spoke first. "Funny," Naomi said calmly from behind them. "I was just thinking the same thing about half the people in this room." Silence crashed over the table. The men looked embarrassed immediately while Naomi walked past them without another word. Ethan stared after her with something dangerously close to admiration. An hour later, the ballroom lights dimmed for the Harmony House performance. The children stepped nervously onto the stage while wealthy guests barely looked up from their conversations. Naomi sat at the grand piano beneath a soft golden spotlight and rested her fingers against the keys. Then she began to play. The melody drifted through the ballroom slowly at first. Gentle. Emotional. Achingly beautiful. One by one, conversations stopped completely. Even the waiters froze. Ethan felt his chest tighten unexpectedly because he recognized the song immediately. It was the exact piece his mother used to play every Sunday morning beside the piano in their family penthouse before she died. Ethan stared at Naomi in stunned silence from across the ballroom. He had never told her that story. Not once. And somehow, beneath all the crystal lights and billionaire arrogance surrounding them, Naomi Brooks had just reached the one part of his soul nobody else had touched in years. The applause inside the ballroom lasted nearly a full minute after Naomi finished playing. Wealthy donors who had ignored her earlier now stood clapping beneath the chandeliers as though they had suddenly discovered humanity between champagne glasses and political conversations. But Naomi did not smile proudly when the music ended. She simply stood from the piano bench and guided the children into a respectful bow before helping the youngest girl off stage first. Ethan watched her from across the ballroom with an emotion he could no longer pretend was simple curiosity. Something about Naomi unsettled every carefully controlled part of his life because she moved through humiliation with grace instead of fear. And men like Ethan Caldwell had spent their entire lives surrounded by people who feared losing things. Naomi seemed untouched by that fear completely. Victoria noticed the way Ethan looked at her. That was what terrified her most. Not attraction. Men in powerful circles always chased beautiful distractions. But this felt different. Ethan looked at Naomi the way people looked at truth after spending years living comfortably inside lies. Later that evening, while guests gathered near the ballroom terrace overlooking Central Park, Victoria stood beside several socialites discussing the gala when one woman laughed softly. The pianist certainly made an impression tonight. Another woman smirked behind her wine glass. Apparently Ethan Caldwell enjoys charity work more than we realized. The women laughed quietly together. Victoria smiled along with them, but her fingers tightened around her champagne flute. She had spent years building the perfect future beside Ethan. Every appearance. Every fundraiser. Every business dinner. She understood how power worked, and she knew something dangerous when she saw it. Naomi Brooks was dangerous because she made Ethan feel human again. Across the ballroom, Ethan finally found Naomi near the service hallway helping the children into their coats. "You should be out there," he said softly. Naomi adjusted a scarf around one little girl's neck before answering. "The kids are tired." Ethan glanced toward the ballroom where reporters and donors still talked excitedly about the performance. "They loved you." Naomi gave a small shrug. "People in rooms like this love inspiration stories for about 10 minutes. Ethan frowned slightly. "That is not fair." Naomi looked up at him calmly. Fairness usually depends on which side of the ballroom someone was born into. Before Ethan could respond, an older voice interrupted them. "Ethan." They both turned. Richard Caldwell stood several feet away in a dark tailored tuxedo with the same cold composure his son had inherited. Even at 70, the founder of the Caldwell Empire carried authority like a permanent shadow around him. His sharp blue eyes moved toward Naomi briefly before returning to Ethan. "Your fiancé is looking for you." Ethan's jaw tightened subtly. "I will be there in a minute." Richard remained silent for a moment longer before speaking carefully. "Miss Brooks." Naomi nodded politely. "Mr. Caldwell." Richard studied her with unreadable eyes. "You play beautifully." "Thank you." Another silence followed. Heavy. Strange. Then Richard looked back toward Ethan. "Your mother used to play that exact song." Ethan froze slightly. Naomi's expression shifted almost invisibly. Richard continued quietly. "I have not heard it in this building since she died." For the first time all evening, Richard Caldwell looked genuinely unsettled. Then, without another word, he walked away into the crowd of billionaires and politicians waiting for him near the ballroom staircase. Ethan stared after his father in confusion. "How did you know that song?" Naomi slowly buttoned her coat while the children gathered around her. "I did not." Ethan frowned. "That was my mother's favorite piece." Naomi looked genuinely surprised. "An old jazz pianist taught it to me years ago in Chicago." Ethan felt something strange settle into his chest again. Not coincidence. Something deeper. Something difficult to explain logically. Before he could say anything else, flashes of light suddenly exploded near the ballroom entrance. Reporters rushed toward the lobby while voices rose excitedly across the hotel. One of the event coordinators hurried toward Ethan, nervously holding a tablet. "Sir, the man," whispered urgently. Ethan took the screen and his expression darkened instantly. A gossip website had just published photographs of him visiting Harmony House in Brooklyn beside a headline that read, "Billionaire heir spending secret nights with mystery musician before wedding." Naomi saw the article reflected in Ethan's eyes before he even spoke. Around them, whispers spread quickly through the ballroom like wildfire moving through dry grass. Victoria stood near the center of the room watching everything unfold with terrifying stillness. And for the first time since meeting Naomi Brooks, Ethan realized the world he came from was finally preparing to punish both of them. By sunrise, the story had already spread across every major gossip site in Manhattan. Photographs of Ethan Caldwell entering Harmony House appeared beside headlines designed to humiliate Naomi while protecting the billionaire image at the same time. Mystery woman between billionaire couple. The musician distracting America's most eligible CEO. Social media turned Naomi into a conversation overnight. Some people defended her. Most did not. Strangers who had never met her suddenly felt entitled to decide who she was. By morning, reporters were parked outside Harmony House waiting for photographs. Naomi stood near the second-floor office window watching camera flashes reflect against dirty snow piled beside the sidewalk. Down below, children arrived carefully through the side entrance while volunteers tried shielding them from questions shouted by journalists. "Miss Brooks, are you involved with Ethan Caldwell? Did you break up the engagement? How long has this relationship been happening?" Naomi closed the blinds slowly without answering any of them. Across Manhattan, Ethan sat inside the top-floor boardroom at Caldwell Technologies while investors argued around him in expensive suits. "This scandal is becoming a problem," one board member warned. "Stock analysts are already discussing reputational instability." Another executive adjusted his glasses nervously. "The media narrative suggests emotional recklessness before a major merger." Ethan stared coldly at the financial reports spread across the polished conference table. For years, these meetings controlled his life. Numbers, public image, political relationships. Every decision calculated carefully to protect the empire his family built. But all he could think about was Naomi standing alone outside Harmony House while strangers turned her into entertainment. "Enough," Ethan said quietly. The room fell silent immediately. "This conversation ends now." One older board member frowned. "Ethan, perception matters." Ethan looked directly at him. "So does basic decency." Hours later, Ethan drove to Brooklyn himself despite his security team warning against it. The moment he stepped out of the car near Harmony House, reporters rushed toward him shouting questions from every direction. Cameras flashed aggressively while microphones nearly blocked the sidewalk. Ethan ignored all of them and walked straight inside the youth center. The building felt unusually quiet. Several children sat near the music room pretending not to notice the tension around them. Naomi stood alone beside the piano organizing sheet music with calm precision even though exhaustion showed faintly beneath her eyes. Ethan approached carefully. "Why did you not call me?" Naomi continued stacking papers without looking up. "You already have enough problems." Ethan lowered his voice. "You are not a problem." Naomi finally looked at him then. "That is easy to say when you can leave this behind whenever you want." Ethan stepped closer. "You think I want to?" The silence between them felt heavier than any argument. Naomi folded her arms gently. "The children are scared. Parents are calling. Some donors want distance until the headlines disappear." Ethan glanced around the aging room slowly. "I can fix this." Naomi shook her head immediately. "That is exactly what I am afraid of." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Naomi looked toward the windows where reporters still waited outside beneath the freezing Brooklyn wind. People like me do not survive scandals the same way people like you do. Her voice remained calm, but the truth inside it hit Ethan harder than anger ever could. Before he could answer, the front door suddenly opened again. Victoria Sinclair entered wearing a long ivory coat and dark sunglasses despite the cloudy weather outside. The entire room grew still immediately. Naomi did not move. Ethan's expression hardened. Victoria removed her gloves slowly before speaking with frightening calm. The press situation is becoming unbearable. Ethan crossed his arms. Then stop feeding it. Victoria ignored him and looked directly at Naomi instead. Do you know what people are saying this morning? Naomi remained silent. Victoria continued softly, almost sympathetically. They are calling you ambitious. Calculated. A woman trying to climb into a life she was never meant to enter. Ethan stepped forward instantly. That is enough. But Naomi gently raised one hand, stopping him. For several seconds, she simply looked at Victoria without anger. Without shame. Then she spoke quietly. I grew up in a neighborhood where mothers worked 3 jobs just to keep heat running during winter. Her voice stayed steady. Trust me. I learned a long time ago that some rooms were never built for people like us. Victoria held her gaze carefully. Then perhaps you should stop walking into them. The silence afterward felt almost unbearable. Ethan looked at Naomi, expecting pain in her expression. Instead, he saw something worse. Acceptance. And in that moment, he realized the world had spent so many years teaching Naomi Brooks not to expect kindness that humiliation no longer surprised her at all.